Hey there, Beyond Tech listeners. We have a little bit of an update before we get into today's episode, which is on LAIR, Lab Automation and Industrial Robotics. Jackie, what news do we have to share?
eTech Group is going to be showcasing our lab automation and industrial robotics expertise at two upcoming ISPE events. We are going to be at the ISPE Boston Area Chapter Product Show, which is tomorrow, October 1st, 2025 at Gillette Stadium. Find us at booth W69. And we're going to be at the ISPE Annual Meeting and Expo, October 26th through the 29th in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah, these events are a really great complement to today's episode, where we explore how LAIR is transforming workflows across life sciences. And I believe Sura, who's our subject matter expert that we have on today's episode, she's going to be at both events, right?
Yes, she's going to be in person at both events. And I really do think that you guys will enjoy today's episode. And Sura is lovely. So if you're going to be at these events too, you should definitely stop by and say hi.
Absolutely. It's a great chance to be able to talk with her more about the topic at both of those events. So great.
Yeah. And with that, enjoy the rest of the show.
Enjoy. Welcome to Beyond Tech, where innovation meets insight.
We're your hosts, Jackie Slatt and Jennifer Palumbo. We bring curiosity and clarity and a passion for technology-driven storytelling to every conversation. Today we're exploring the power of lab automation and industrial robotics, or LAIR. It's a newer application for eTech Group coming to us through our recent acquisition of JSAT Automation. We're discussing how LAIR can transform workflows across R&D labs, industrial settings, and manufacturing environments.
We're thrilled to have Sura Hadi with us today. Sura is the head of lab automation and industrial robotics at eTech Group. She leads advanced automation and robotics initiatives for life sciences, biotech, biopharma, and industrial clients. With over 23 years of experience, Sura brings deep expertise in delivering innovative solutions across complex scientific and manufacturing environments. She's also the co-host of a podcast called Helical Brew, which explores how emerging technologies are transforming science and industry. So thank you, Sura, for spending time with us today and giving us some insight into this new application.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I know you're probably an expert in this more than we are with more podcast experience. So
actually, tell me a little bit about Helical Brew. I'm curious.
Yeah, so a group of us that have known each other throughout the industry as the industry was coming up got together at one of the conferences and thought, hey, maybe we should explore this in depth and have a podcast, the likes of which wasn't seen in our industry ever. Bring people on, talk about the interesting things they're doing, and just get the word out there on what lab automation is, how we can plug in different applications and innovations into it. We have some really cool series, like an AI series, where we've been able to bring AI thought leaders in to discuss how AI is really transforming things like, molecular docking, and even something as simple as like searching for papers in order to find the right approach to your application.
Oh, that's really cool. So how long have you been doing it?
So I think we're on episode 43.
Oh my gosh, wow, that's really good. All right, I need to check this out. I'm embarrassed that I don't already know about it, but
yeah,
that
it's cool.
Like
we get to go to conferences and do like live shows, which is fun.
That's awesome. I love that. Very cool. And that kind of makes me a little bit more curious about your background. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into this field? Maybe did you plan on getting into automation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, most people say they don't ever plan on getting into automation because you can't go to school for it. There's nothing to show you how to automate scientific workflows, especially out there, right? So for me, I was kind of coming up as automation was coming up in the industry. And so when I was at Diversa, I would see our engineering teams build like robots and try to, really speed our discovery efforts. But it wasn't until I got to Genentech, my apologies, in Palo Alto. And in Palo Alto, we had a sister site in Leiden that had a Beckman Coulter robot, and everyone would queue up for months to try to get their screening campaigns onto that robot. In the meantime, we had a Perkin Elmer Janus that one of my colleagues had bought that was just kind of sitting in the corner. So when I was faced with the daunting task of screening 80,000 variants on a biochemical assay that I developed, and we were waiting for Leiden to do this, I thought, well, I created this assay. I kind of want to see how it works. I pulled the samples out of the freezer, grew them up, tested them on this like fluorophore labeled cornstarch. So it was really qualitative. It gave you like a yes or no answer, and it was a pretty purple color. And just screened it and presented the results at my biochemistry meeting to the head of our biochemistry group and said, hey, at least we know what's a no. And now we go from 80,000 variants to 4,000 that we can go to Leiden with. And that's a much better starting point for success than not having done that. So after I did that, they got like super excited about what we can do on site. And, long story short, we ended up just, demolishing D-Wing, building an integrated like lab that allowed us to have these discrete operations with machinery and liquid handling. So it was a really exciting journey because it's kind of like following your passion and forging a path for the company that you're passionate about.
Yeah, like it's necessity is the mother of invention, so to speak, right? And that must have been such a light bulb moment for your employer as well.
Yeah, it was exciting because, at the time it was like a rush to market, especially, in the time of biofuels. And so the longer we were in queue, the longer our competitor could actually get out there.
Right.
So just that body of work allowed us to really get ahead in the patent space. And that was really great to see that we can do something with this time that we were, kind of waiting to get into the right facility.
Really the essence of automation, right? It takes something that maybe is a repetitive or lengthy task and it lets you focus on the thing that you really care most about. And so it's really cool that you were able to apply it to the lab environment. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I love what you said there because I don't think of automation as automation for its own sake, right? It's a tool that drives innovation in science. And I think if you think about it that way, it opens up a lot more avenues for how you can apply it.
Yeah, I love that.
Before we get into too far along, can you give a quick overview of what lab automation and industrial robotics is? And you kind of hit on it a little bit, but just to kind of bring everyone along on this journey with us.
Yeah, that's a good point. I tend to kind of go off and not really explain for people who don't know. Lab automation is just using robots, software, integrated systems to allow these scientific workflows and even industrial workflows, lab automation is scientific workflows, to be streamlined so that you can effectively and efficiently get the data that you need to move forward. It's being used everywhere from biotech startups, automating like sample prep, to big global pharma companies managing 24/7 bioprocessing because it can be a continuous process and total lights out, hands off. Industrial robotics brings in the heavier duty automation, the more common in manufacturing spaces. So we're seeing these two worlds merge in things like GMP ready labs and advanced cell therapy environments. And so LAIR is laboratory automation and industrial robotics because these two worlds aren't necessarily separate.
Yeah, definitely. When I think about the term industrial robotics, the last thing I think of, honestly, is a lab environment. So it's an interesting dichotomy of concepts. And you would say it's widely adopted now in biopharma and biotech?
Yeah, it's very, very well known that you can't get to your end result fast enough with the number of people that you have, or even you can't get the level of precision and accuracy that you can get with lab automation. So any biotech company is using automation in the laboratory in some way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, you saying industrial robotics, and certainly there's industrial robotics in different industries, maybe packaging, warehousing. How does that application differ in the lab environment, or is it just very much the same?
So industrial robotics in the lab environment could be, industrial robots, like big Staubli arms that build, cars are being used to move tiny microtiter plates. But you see those robotics in, cable manufacturing, you see them in, food and beverage, you see them in the other industrial spaces of manufacturing. And so if your upstream is these small microtiter plates with smaller geometries that have 96 to 384 well experiments, your downstream is these bigger vats and the bigger like vials and tubes and things like that. And so as you move down the process in a company, you're going to encounter each piece from the micro to the macro, and we need to provide automation solutions across that breadth.
Would you say there are any trends in the intersection of lab automation and industrial robotics?
100%. I'm seeing a lot of these, a big move towards the modular interoperable systems. There's also more interest in traceability. As you know, the trend of the day is AI ready data capture. A lot of harmonizing, LIMS, ELNs and robotics so that you're not staying in the space where you generate data. Now you're moving to how you can analyze and capture and store data so you can make informed decisions. So this push for speed and quality creates these kind of hybrid environments, and you need the flexibility of these labs with the rigor of the production lines to combine and provide the answer for these companies.
Sure. I'm a marketing person. I'm not an expert in LAIR yet. I expect to be after this podcast, though. But can you define LIMS and ELNs for me and hopefully some other folks?
Sure. LIMS is laboratory information management systems. ELNs is what you would think of as a physical notebook. Now they're creating electronic notebooks, and that allows a lot more flexibility because as the data is in these laboratory information management systems, it can very easily be linked to a notebook. So a lot of what you're seeing in labs is this kind of gap between when experiments are planned and run to when they're actually captured. When you're talking about, first to market, or even talking about how we can make sure that we have traceability for what we're doing in the lab and knowledge isn't lost when that person leaves the company, you rely on these laboratory notebooks and you rely on this manual input of information and SOPs. Well, you don't have to do that as much if you've got LIMS and ELNs and, environments that allow for this digital capture. Because as you're doing your experiment, as you're planning it, you're on an iPad, you're on a computer, it's kind of backed up by what is syncing in the cloud and allowing that data to get captured in real time. And that's a big thing that I encountered coming in the industry is, hey, you give your 2 weeks notice. Now you've got 2 weeks to put in, 40 days if you're that far behind of the experiments you ran and the data and, copy pasting with glue sticks, right? We don't want to do that and we don't want to rely on that.
So you kind of mentioned these handwritten notebooks. How is LAIR helping these clients transition from these manual processes to the integrated workflows?
Right. And it's not just the like writing down in a lab notebook, right? It's the actual manual process. And when you're doing experimentation, you're kind of at the mercy of whatever scientist is running it and how accurate they can be to imitate themselves in the next round of the experiment, right? Humans are inherently flawed. We can't do something the same way every single time, but robots can, right? They do everything that they're programmed to do and they stay within that space. So when we're partnering early with these biotech and pharma clients, companies maybe in the preclinical or scale-up phase, we look at their pain points, we map data and process flows and design the right sized automation and give them flexibility and room to grow. So we try to make sure the implementation is just not technically sound, but user adoptable and sustainable. Because if the user doesn't want to use it because it's too hard of a learning curve, you're not going to fix your process. So that could be anywhere from taking an NGS workflow that's very manual and you're following a clock to make sure, a timer to make sure you're going into the tubes at the right time, to, implementing a machine that can do 96, aspirations and dispenses in 3 minutes at the right volumes that you were looking for. So that allows that scientist to take a step back and have now the data to work with rather than the physical moving liquid from one tube to another as fast as possible.
And imagine it's not straightforward to take something that's very much a benchtop process into a fully automated work cell. What does that look like? Can you describe that a little bit, what that process looks like?
Yeah, that's a good point because everyone does something differently every single time they do it, even if they have an SOP. Yeah. Sometimes when we're working with scientists and we try to, at first, just to kind of step back, you need that technical translation to understand what they're doing. And sometimes when we watch what they're doing, they're not actually writing in the SOP. And then you take this tube and you kind of turn it upside down a couple times. And after you do that, then you pipette out. If you don't take that into account and if you're not watching that, we call it the scientific shadow moment. Yeah. If you're not watching that process and you're trying to translate it to a machine, you're wondering hey, why am I not getting uniform mixing? Why am I not getting a sample that's, homogeneous in the end so that the variability is very high? It's because you're not actually aware of what they're doing. So technical translation is super important. And then inherently in robotics, you have to have process miniaturization, right? Sometimes we can build robots and work cells that take in flasks or take in tubes, but sometimes the goal is to get to that density of a microtiter plate, 96 wells, 384 wells, 1536 wells, right? And so there's that miniaturization that needs to happen. And there's a lot of biochemistry considerations in that. Things aren't going to work the same way in less liquid than they would in this big flask that you're using. So there's a lot of collaboration and collaborative design to understand what the scientist is doing and have the scientists work with you to make sure that the scientific process you're automating is adaptable to this miniaturization process. So there's a lot of mapping the process in detail, looking at tolerances, timing, the data input, output, what are the fail states, what are the acceptable parameters, right? And when we work on that, then we can prototype and integrate with the informatics systems that they want to do, data capture, anything that they want to automate on that end. And then we iterate. It's never like one size fits all. It's what is your process? How can we help? And what else do you need from it?
I'm trying to take it all in. That it's a lot. Very, very cool.
Yeah, I talked too fast. Sorry about that.
No, I'm also not an engineer, so it takes me a little longer. When you're working with these companies, what kind of roadblocks are they facing when they're trying to scale? I mean, I know you've touched on like human error and just not being able to repeat, but are there other things that stop companies from kind of going down this path?
It's a lot of, the culture, the scientific culture is such that it's inherently, it tends to silo, right? People have a way that they want to run a process that's their way. And so you get a lot of maybe misalignment between teams. The roadblocks are kind of cultural and infrastructural in nature. They might not have, scientists, IT, facilities, they don't all speak the same language, right? There's different things that they're interested in. So there's sometimes that misalignment that just happens with them trying to understand how to get to where they need to get to. There's also a tendency a lot of times to underestimate some of the upfront planning. And that upfront planning you need, and it's absolutely imperative to get a unified data strategy, right? There could be pushback from the users if the system, like I said, doesn't feel intuitive. They don't want to use it if it's easier for them to go on Excel, for example, and analyze data, even though that's siloed and now you're working on this computer that no one has access to, really, right? You have to make things, very intuitive for them. So this data standardization, SOP consistency, the SOPs have to be nailed down or there's enough forethought into it that you can adapt it to a system, right? Because we can create variables, we can capture changes as you're trying to do like a proof of concept, but you have to kind of know where you're going with that. So sometimes companies try to scale before the core workflow is stable. And that can lead to delays and setbacks and even some frustrations on the user side.
I'm not feeling totally lost now because just in the other episodes that we've recorded, I feel like we've hit on a lot of these subjects of like planning, of getting everyone on the same page, of understanding where you want to go and like what the ultimate goal is, and then kind of aligning all the players together. So pointing that out, it's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, when you're like a scientist and you're working on like your PhD and everything leading up to it is a very like individual event. And now you need to collaborate because this is just not your assay. It has to involve everyone else to make it a success, right?
Yeah, that's also a very good point. Like seeing the bigger picture of just outside of what is your focus, and then like bigger picture, how can we use this? Where else can it go? And how can we just repeat it and keep it standardized?
But it's a good segue into a topic of, you were talking about making things intuitive for the users, and there's different types of users in biopharma. And so you've got your lab environment, but then you have also got that manufacturing environment, very separate groups. So how do you design automation solutions that account for both of those environments, the lab and downstream manufacturing?
Yeah, that's a good question. To take it like a step back, the whole process it fits together like puzzle pieces for a company, right? You go from one step to the next, upstream to downstream. And so when we're looking at that holistically, we're looking for continuity in as many places as we can get it. So continuity in data, in consumables and process control. That way we're thinking about everything from barcode formats to LIMS integrations, and for some of our clients to GMP compliance. So it's about trying to kind of future-proof without over-engineering anything. And we work closely with both the QA and R&D teams to align that. But the more that our goal is around designing upstream systems with manufacturing readiness in mind, it allows us to create this seamless handoff, right, between R&D and production. Because the last thing you want to do is do everything in a format upstream that in no way fits anything that's being captured downstream. And now you've got two separate projects that just don't talk to each other, which kind of goes back to the point, like, try to involve us early because we can help you take that holistic approach to the whole thing.
Right, exactly. That's a very good point.
Can you kind of walk us through an example where your team helped bridge the gap from lab to the production environment?
Yeah, I have so many case studies. It's hard to like pick just one.
They're like your children.
They're all my favorites, right? Okay, so we have a genomics client scaling up sample extraction, and we designed and built a modular robotic system that could handle high throughput plate transfers. So a lot of plates with a lot of density going through the system. And what you get out of that is, as you scale up screening, or as you scale up, running these workflows through robotic systems, you are moving the bottleneck from how many plates can we get through and how many samples can we get through to a lot of data now that has nowhere to go. And so if you're not prepared for that, you're just moving your bottleneck down, and you're encountering the same delays in, getting that cycle time that you need because you don't have the time or bandwidth to look at the data. So as part of this, we also integrated with their LIMS system. And later we were able to translate that into a semi-GMP work cell that allowed traceability and electronic batch records. So now we tied those two pieces together so they could run as much as they want, but they had the traceability, the electronic batch records. They had the ability to actually suss out what kind of data was coming from their runs. So that's a good example of where we're not only building a work cell, but we're allowing for that integration with LIMS that is so imperative to moving on to the next step.
I bet you have the joke about case studies and projects that you've worked on is probably really real, because I would imagine there's a fair amount of really cool things that you were able to do in different projects and for different clients. And there's always this balance that you have to have, right, of innovation and then practicality. And what would you say, do you have a methodology or an approach that you like to take in applying that balance for solutions that you design?
Yeah, it's interesting because, innovation is so exciting. Trying to everything that comes to us is not necessarily a one size fits all. And you can kind of get super excited about hey, what could we do here and how can we manage it, right? It's really like managing expectations and managing solutions that are practical for the client, right? They usually have a budget, they have their own vision. You never come in with your own ideas, you sort of build on their ideas because it's coming from their source of innovation. But just because you can get different systems that move outside of a liquid handler, which is the big thing at SLAS this year, right? It's abstracting the pipetting away from a traditional gantry of liquid handling. Now it can move to the plates rather than the plates on it, right? Doesn't mean that that's practical for what you need. So it's all about making sure that you identify the scope and identify the best solution for them within their budget. So innovation is awesome, and we try to get it as much as we can within what we're trying to deliver. But really what we're trying to deliver is something that is practical and repeatable and flexible and can grow with the client. And that's what we want, is the data proves the value of the system or the assay that we've developed together.
One of the things that you were hitting on a little bit is the informatics becoming a major differentiator in lab automation. From your perspective, how are clients using the informatics to turn data into actionable insights?
Yeah, informatics is something that is absolutely a key differentiator, but sometimes is also an afterthought, which is unfortunate, right? From our perspective, clients are increasingly leveraging informatics, not just to manage data, but to translate it into real-time insights. And these insights allow them to more directly impact decision making. And we talked about siloed data collection before, and we're seeing a shift from that, right? Nobody wants to depend on an Excel sheet on a colleague's computer that they can't access. We want to make sure that we have integrated systems where instrument data, metadata, sample tracking, it's all unified across all platforms. And that allows everyone to go faster troubleshooting, more confident tech transfer, and that's super exciting, right? One of the other exciting areas here is the rise of this like lab-wide data lake and conceptual dashboards, and these connect ELNs, LIMS, scheduling tools with equipment outputs. So our clients kind of use these integrations to identify bottlenecks across workflows, and that allows them to flag quality deviations before they become an issue, and even predict equipment maintenance needs. We're working with a lot of clients that are trying to get that reliability data out of their equipment as well. So there's a lot of opportunities in that, and I think that's really exciting to look at data integrity, traceability. These are major pain points, and many labs rely on kind of a patchwork of manual steps or just connected systems, someone walking up to a clipboard and writing something down. And that's kind of where LAIR brings in the value, right? Helping clients standardize, digital backbone, reduce human error, automate tracking across the entire sample life cycle. And that's really important when we look ahead, because real-time decision making is becoming the norm and needs to become the norm to become more efficient, right? For labs to become more efficient. So with the right data infrastructure, scientists will be able to adjust runs on the fly, reallocate resources dynamically, get more done in, fewer delays that are encountered. I think that's the dream, right? And once you have that traceability and that connection, informatics just isn't supporting lab automation. It's the future of where lab automation needs to go.
Yeah, you said something that I paused on in terms of flagging quality deviations, because if I think about anything that's being developed in a lab, even in a lab environment, it's a smaller amount, but there's still probably a lot of concern around like a waste or costs that results from the waste of a quality deviation or an issue like that. Is there like an example of recent memory that you have of a time where that was something that a client was able to identify using the informatics?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think people don't understand, the workflows that are running through these systems. It seems like a bunch of liquid and little, microtire plates, but each mistake, could be up to, $4,000 to $40,000 in terms of reagents, time, resources. Ouch. So it's really important to identify that. And,
right.
We've seen that integration really elaborate a lot of confusion on the side of the vendor. You can run campaigns, and I've seen this in my own background, where you go to, the Netherlands to run a campaign, and it's not until you get the results at the end of like a week that you realize that the sample never even expressed what you wanted it to express. So you were screening and just getting dead results for the sample because it was dead. There was nothing there that you can capture. And I think capturing that from the outside is important. We have reliability data that we capture off of instrumentation so that we understand, the drift for these systems. Sometimes you get incubators that don't hold temperature for very long, or liquid handling dispensers that don't actually accurately dispense because they haven't been PM'd or calibrated recently. So we can track those, with simple protocols and capturing metadata off of the systems. That way you can have a dashboard that allows you to see how your equipment is performing before you even put anything on there.
Yeah, so informatics is harnessing data as the tool throughout the whole process. Similar theme, like we were saying, without automation is a tool, right? In your science or whatever you're trying to do. But data integrity, traceability, I got to imagine, are really important elements to making sure that you're actually getting the most use out of the data. So can you talk a little bit about how you ensure that for clients?
Yeah, and that's important to them as well. And I think, we're not afraid to try emerging tech, but only if it supports clear business or scientific goals. So we like to pilot new ideas in sandbox environments because I want to deliver something that is robust, maintainable, intuitive to the end user, and that's the filter that I look at everything through. So we always ask, will this make the scientist's life easier? And that helps guide our decisions. And because we're testing in these isolated pilots, we can prove the ROI fast and scale only what fits the operational and budget realities. And that's really important with how we can communicate with our clients for the best approach.
Yeah, so we've there's a lot of possibilities and opportunities within LAIR. So if somebody is just kind of dipping their foot in, what sort of clients should be thinking about LAIR services?
Yeah, and I think that hits upon everyone really wants automation, but they're always afraid that it's going to be super expensive, and we're just going to try to get this one machine and have it work for us, which works sometimes. And I think any company planning for scale, that has a product map, roadmap map or plans to integrate automation and future-proof it should always reach out to us because especially for startups, thinking ahead can save time and avoid major retrofits later. What we find is, and I'm so grateful for all our clients, but what we find is we're brought in to kind of retrofit something that they've already purchased. So a simple strategy that we can just come up with up front can save months down the line of retrofitting and trying to integrate new tools and trying to make something you bought that maybe doesn't work for you. We can make it happen, but if we think about it ahead of time, it probably will be easier on the budget and easier for the users down the line.
Sometimes it can make the process better too by thinking of the automation ahead of time, right?
Yeah, I've seen that in my career, right? Because automation wasn't a thing that was thought of intuitively at the very beginning. And so it was a lot of buying the newest toy and trying to make it work. And then you get to, my last startup, which was CSO, was immediately thinking about automation from the outset. So we were able to get the tools that fit the scientists and the work for that biotherapeutic company right off the bat. And it wasn't a major investment. It was just, a couple of tools here and there that grew with the company.
Oh, yeah, that's super, super smart to think about it ahead of time. It's a constant struggle. Like you say, you're happy to do retrofits, but there's so much benefit that a company can get by thinking about it ahead of time. But lab automation, industrial robotics, and system integrator, is that two things that typically goes together? How do they work in that space together?
So lab automation, industrial robotics, and system integrations, there's a lot of different opportunities out there for companies to engage with different vendors and services. And most integrators either understand manufacturing or life science R&D. They rarely understand both from what I've seen. The nice thing is we bring these worlds together because we have a deep understanding of informatics, lab automation, and real world lab workflows. And that cross-functional fluency is what makes our solutions stick because we just don't bring the robots in. We design systems with scientific logic and operational longevity in mind. We have engineers that have scientific backgrounds. So that depth is really hard to find in this market, and that dual fluency in the lab and factory environments really gets us pretty far in the space. So there's a lot of options out there, but I'd advise anyone looking to just have conversations with everyone involved because you might want a full solution, and we provide that in LAIR at eTech.
Right. This was super interesting conversation and helped me learn and understand a little bit more because this is a new application for eTech Group, and I would not say I'm an expert at any of our applications, so it's always fun to learn.
Well, I do want to.
Unfortunately, I'm very passionate about it, so I can talk all day.
Well, I would not say unfortunately. So for our listeners, Sura comes to us from JSAT Automation, which is now an eTech Group company, and we're in the process of migrating JSAT into the eTech Group brand. But everybody at eTech Group, particularly those in the life sciences space, have just been so excited to talk to Sura and hear about LAIR and the capabilities. And we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm from our life sciences clients as well. So I think this is going to be a really big thing. So yeah, it's new to eTech Group, but it's certainly not new to Sura. It's certainly not new to JSAT. So It's a really exciting time.
Yeah, and I'm very excited for the excitement. It's nice to be part of
Yeah.
E-Tech Group and have that passion behind it.
Awesome.
Yeah, you've got a lot of big fans here. So what?
This is true. Everybody, every meeting I'm in, we had a good, Sura gave us a presentation. We had a great meeting with Sura.
Yeah.
Sura talked me through that. Like, oh my goodness, she is a celeb. That is all I need to say.
We like to end our podcast on what I call like some fun, less technical questions. So if we can go through just a few of those, what piece of advice would you give to someone who's just entering the world of automation?
Yeah, see, I like this question because I feel like it was me, 23 years ago. But I think like the one advice I would have is just be passionate, be endlessly curious, never stop asking why, never stop looking at the world around you, right? In this field, you need both the science and the systems, and you'll be 10 times more effective if you can speak both languages, right? It's not like you need to get a degree in both, but being curious and collaborative and open allows you to get that, right? Because automation engineers, the best ones, they're not just coders or tinkerers, right? They're translators, and they connect the dots between systems and people. And that's really important, and that's what gets people excited about the work that they're doing.
I love that answer. I think that's great. Now, this is kind of a fun question. What is one lesson you have learned the hard way in your career?
Oh, man.
Yeah, I think always involve the end users early. If the scientists don't believe in it won't get used. And no matter how well it's designed, it won't get used, and people will just, you won't get that ROI out of it.
That's critical. And then less technical, but what is one task in your personal life that you wish you could automate?
I think like most parents, we're tired of being chauffeurs. So I'm really behind this self-driving car business. Like, can we get that to take my child to all of her events? That would be amazing.
That is so funny. My neighbor just went and drove in a self-driving car in Phoenix, and he was like, it is so cool. He was like, I can't wait for it to expand and go to more cities. I think I don't think you're alone
in San
there.
Francisco, and I was like, so close.
I am very into that. I do not have children, but I am very into being able to use my commute time for things that I enjoy more.
Yeah, that was part of the great thing about living in the Bay Area is, to get from San Francisco to Palo Alto, you had to take the Caltrain, and they had Wi-Fi. So you're basically working on your commute. Yeah. It was the best of both worlds.
It really is. I am here for it. Bring it on.
And this one, maybe, I guess I could reword this one to just describe your job to me, but describe your job to a 5-year-old.
It's funny because everyone else in my life, like my family and my friends, aren't really in the industry. So I'm constantly having to, explain it in the best way possible. And I think before it used to be, I build robots to help scientists move liquid from one tube to another. Now I build robots to help scientists do their work faster, better, without making mistakes.
That is very simple and clear. I like it. So I just have one final question, and I've been asking this to everyone. What would you like to see us cover on future episodes of Beyond Tech?
Yeah, I like this question, and I think, I touched on it earlier when I was talking about the AI series that we had, but I'm very intrigued by AI in lab environments. We do a little bit of that in LAIR for some of our clients around like sustainable lab design, or real talk on how to scale automation without losing flexibility. So those are like 3 topics, right? AI in lab environments, sustainable lab design, or real talk on how to scale automation without losing flexibility. There's a lot in each of those. I think you can make like a series out of each one if you wanted.
Yeah,
that's great. Well, that is all the questions I have. I thank you for spending some time with us today and helping us learn a little bit more, because like I said, there's lots of big fans and excitement around this within E-Tech, and I hope beyond.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get more clients and internal questions, because I think the more that we talk, the more that we can discover what we can do together.
Yeah. I learn something every time I talk to you, Sarah.